I'm really grateful to have been asked to speak here today and share some perspectives from my own work. I'm going to just briefly introduce myself before we get into the material, just so you have an understanding of my positionality personally and what I'm bringing to this information. There's a picture of me, super happy, doing what I love best, sharing information about neuroaffirmative practice. It was getting ready to share the info. It was my first day back in face-to-face teaching after COVID had begun. Working with a new intake of psychologists at University College Dublin. I'm an autistic psychologist. I specialize in neuroaffirmative practice and positive psychology. I have a background in various fields and modalities, acceptance and commitment therapy, solution-focused brief therapy, trauma-informed approaches, mindfulness-based interventions, and clinical hypnotherapy. In my 20s, I also trained and worked for many years in high performance, working with people who were excelling in their respective fields when I lived in the USA and the Bahamas. And then in 2020, I founded a nonprofit organization called Thriving Autistic. I had just a few short years earlier made the momentous and life-changing discovery that I was autistic. How I got to the ripe age of 40-something, working in the field that I'm in, without knowing this, is testament to how narrow our conception of what it means to be autistic was at the time, and still is in many places. However, that is a story for another time, and I think I need to know you all a little bit better before I'll divulge more. But when I was discharged with the confirmation of being autistic, there was no professional support available. There were no pathways, public or private, where I was living in Ireland. None of my colleagues had any great understanding of how to support a late in life identified woman. And frankly, many couldn't comprehend that I was autistic. They only saw the achievements. They never saw my struggles. So I turned to the internet. I discovered a rich, vibrant community of autistic adults supporting one another, sharing experiences and uncovering patterns. Then I found disability rights activists who were patiently explaining, sharing, and helping to unpack internalized ableism. I found a community of people who were coming from all walks of life, non-speaking autistic people who express their inner worlds with such exquisite precision. The written medium leveled the playing field. Everywhere I looked, autistic people with co-occurring neurodivergencies, co-occurring health conditions, people who'd been misdiagnosed or labeled lazy, heartless, blunt, rude, and amongst many others, were gathering to share knowledge and understand themselves and each other, and stand up to the discrimination and stereotypes that abound. These people, my community, were researchers and scientists and therapists and musicians and creatives and polymaths and parents themselves. Just as with non-autistic people, there are autistics who can work and provide for themselves and their families, and there are autistics who cannot. It seems that the majority of us fall somewhere in the middle. Unemployment and underemployment runs rife in our community. It's a real struggle for many of us. However, that's getting ahead of myself. So Thriving Autistic was conceived partly as a way to support other autistic healthcare professionals who were struggling to work in systems where their own neurology wasn't being accommodated for. I wanted to create a space where neurodivergent professionals could support each other to do our best work, sharing resources, referrals, training and mentoring, as well as provide support with the eternally difficult admin aspects of our roles. I also wanted to create a space where adults who'd recently been identified could find sanctuary, where they could meet therapists and coaches and mentors who really understood, where they could be connected in with other autistic adults and get to feel that sense of belonging that I had felt when I finally connected with other adults online after my own identification. Since 2020, we've worked with over 10,000 adults. We now have a global directory of over 100 neurodivergent practitioners. We run monthly groups and workshops for newly identified adults. We offer one-to-one support and advocacy services, as well as vitally important social connections that we facilitate. We also work towards systemic change with our trainings, our advocacy, and consultations for government, universities, and businesses. Steeped in this work, I poured all my learning and my understanding from our wider community into co-authoring the Adult Autism Assessment Handbook, a Neurodiversity affirmative guide. The book is the first of its kind, and it's so much more than just nuts and bolts of assessment. As I've said, my own specialty is in neurodivergent affirmative practice and post-identification support. And my hope for this book is that it has captured a moment in time of the wider conversation right now. It's not a sales pitch. This is genuinely the truth. I'm so proud of the book and the work that my co-authors and I have put into it. Genuinely, I really wish everyone who works in the field could have a free copy. If I was the publisher and I had the money, I would do it, just so that we can help move this conversation further. It would be my absolute honor to be invited to rewrite it again in a few years, because we've all collectively moved the goalposts so much towards more progressive human rights-based approach. Okay, let's move on and get into the material. So in today's talk, I'm going to be covering the following in my brief guided tour around neuroaffirmative support. I have put a link in the chat to download the slides if you want them on your own machine. There's also a link there on that slide, and there's a QR code, I think it's called. So I'm going to divide this into 3 sections. Talking first about neurodivergent affirmative practice, then the importance of neurodivergent post-identification support, and then let's talk about what good support actually looks like. So it's crucial to recognize, though, that this is a fast evolving field, and it's necessary for us all to engage much more comprehensively with the concepts covered if we want to deepen our practice and offer truly neuroaffirmative support. And it's also worthwhile mentioning at the beginning that while many of these concepts will apply when working with various neurominorities, this info is focused specifically on supporting autistic adults primarily. So I also have a model that I've been working on that I'm excited to share with you later, but let's get started. So before we discuss supporting people post-identification, we really need to appreciate the lens with which we're viewing this work through. And I will be bringing us on a whistle-stop tour through some of our primary models for neuroaffirmative practice. In the next few slides, we're going to cover the neurodiversity model, epistemic justice, and models of disability, just so that everyone is on the same page and we have a concrete understanding of our positionality when we're taking this approach. A few terms, though, first of all. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term that describes all of us. It's not a person with neurodiversity or a neurodiverse person, because that would be like saying an animal with biodiversity or a biodiverse plant. It's just not accurate. We're all part of the overall diversity, and you will see this mistake everywhere, even in huge organizations. Neurodivergence is diverging from the typical, and neurodivergent is a person who is not neurotypical. So the human rights-based neurodiversity model encourages us to appreciate the rich tapestry of neurological differences and ways of experiencing life as part of natural diversity among humans. Our first point here, recognition and respect for neurodivergence. When we adopt this perspective, we're shifting away from viewing differences between neurotypes as being inherently wrong or in need of fixing, and instead we view them as merely different ways of being. Just as we appreciate the interdependence and importance of biodiversity in nature, we also appreciate the interdependence and importance of neurodiversity in humans. Second point is the creation of inclusive and accessible environments. Our shared environments should be designed with an intrinsic understanding and acceptance of the variety of human experience. This includes things like adapting teaching methods in schools, accommodating different work styles in the workplace, and ensuring public spaces are accessible and non-discriminatory. Everyone has a right to participate fully and equally in society, And this can only be achieved by making our environments conducive to all types of neurological experiences. And our third and final point is the protection of rights and advocacy. This is crucial. The rights to equality, self-determination, and dignity are fundamental to all people, neurodivergent or not. We need to protect these rights, both legally and socially, and stand up against any form of discrimination. Advocacy from both neurodivergent people and their allies is a critical part of this process. Furthermore, strong community support structures are crucial for providing resources and aid when needed. We're moving in now to a really quick journey through the models of disability so that everyone can consider their own positionality on this. We're looking today at three significant ones: the medical model, the social model, and the biopsychosocial model or biosocial model. So starting with the medical model of disability, this model, it originates from a clinical perspective, and it tends to view disability as a problem that belongs to the individual. It sees disability as an abnormality that needs to be fixed or cured. The focus here then is that there's something inherently wrong within the person, with the goal being to restore that person back to normal functioning through medical intervention or rehabilitation. While it has led to advancements, of course, in medical treatments, it often overlooks the societal and the environmental factors that influences a person's experience of disability. On the other hand, we have the social model of disability, and this model emphasizes that disability isn't something within an individual, but rather a complex collection of barriers, many of which are created by the social environment. So the problem is not the person themselves, but that they are disabled by their environment, by the societal structures and attitudes and barriers that exclude full participation. This model advocates for societal changes to eliminate these barriers and to ensure inclusion. And then finally, we're bringing together aspects of both the medical and the social models into the biosocial or biopsychosocial models. And in essence, the biosocial model synthesizes the medical and social models, appreciating that disability is multifactorial, a combination of factors relating to the person's body, mind, the society in which they live, and their interactions with their environment. But then going a step further, when we consider the biopsychosocial model, we see it incorporates psychological elements too, such as the person's thoughts and their emotions, their behaviors, and their individual differences. By considering all of these components, biological, social, and psychological, the model sees disability as a complex interplay between these factors. It is important to understand the different models, as they will significantly influence your work in post-identification support. Most of us have been brought up steeped in the medical model and believing that that was the only appreciation and understanding of disability. So it's really worthwhile spending the time to unpack and learn and comprehensively understand these different models if you already don't, so that you can unpack your own biases and become more aware of them when moving into this work. It is an evolving topic, and right now the discourse among the autistic community online that I'm seeing and in discussions I've had is that we're predominantly disabled by and disadvantaged by our environments, but that there is still some room for nuance. For instance, some of us, regardless of what universal accommodations are made and adaptations, we may still struggle to access areas of society, crowded concerts, or have sensory distress when necessary healthcare interventions are performed. It's really crucial to note that acknowledging and valuing neurodivergence doesn't negate the reality of disability. So I'm going to delve into a really fundamental but often overlooked concept: the inherent value of disabled life and neurodivergence. First, let's be clear. Acknowledging neurodivergence does not deny disability. In fact, many neurodivergent individuals, myself included, often face significant challenges in a society designed primarily for the dominant neurotype. But these challenges don't overshadow our fundamental right to determine what a successful life looks like for us. Which brings us to our second point. Success is subjective. It's not confined to neurotypical norms, nor should it be. I want you to think for just a moment about what success means to you. Does it look like living independently, engaging in meaningful work, creating art, contributing to your community, or simply finding joy in everyday life? Or maybe it's something entirely different, unique to your experience. Every human has the right to self-determination, to determine what a good life is for themselves on their own terms. And this can be exceptionally difficult for loved ones to accept. The urge to impose societal concepts of a life well lived or a well-rounded person are often a theme in post-identification support. So it's also important now to just for a moment pause and reflect on a concept that has emerged within discussions around neurodivergence, and that is around creating a hierarchy of abilities. And this is a trigger warning. You may have come across phrases like superpowers, high functioning, differently abled, or the tendency to be anti-labels. While on the surface, this may all seem very empowering, I ask you to consider, are we unintentionally upholding neurotypical standards? I have a lot to say about that topic, but we don't have time for that today. But the labels are also inaccurate, and they actually miss entirely the lived nuanced experience of the vast majority of autistics. They deny agency to those deemed high support needs, and they deny support to those deemed higher functioning. In neuroaffirmative practice, we appreciate these nuances and we work towards unpacking and unlearning these neuronormative standards in our lives and in our work. Epistemic justice, again, there's a huge amount that could be said here, but all I'm going to say is it's incredibly important for us to understand that autistic people, neurodivergent people, have faced such injustice. And what we do within neuroaffirmative practice is we place the person back as the expert in their own lives, in their own understanding. We listen to their narrative, we believe them. We believe them as the knower of their own reality. That goes for support, that goes for assessments. If you read our book, when we do go into the nuts and bolts of how to conduct a collaborative adult autism assessment, this is the core of it. We believe the person about their own internal experiences. The source of their knowledge of themselves is valid and it deserves to be valued. It may take some time for a person to trust you and themselves if you're working with them post-assessment support enough to express what they really understand about their experience, because they've usually spent a lifetime being told that what they say is wrong. They say it's too hot outside when it's snowing and you insist they wear a coat because you're right, but actually they may have a completely different sensory experience and it is too hot for them when it's snowing. So it may take a lot of time to unlearn that they can actually be with someone who can trust them, that they are the expert in themselves. And that work is so privileged, such a privilege to be a part of. We're going to discuss the need briefly now for post-identification support. And again, focusing on autistic adults. But first, just for a moment, I want to discuss the language I'm using. I'm using the term identification, I'm sure you've noticed, in place of diagnosis or assessment in most of the cases. And that reflects a key understanding in our neuroaffirming approach that being autistic isn't a condition that's conferred by a clinician in a moment of diagnosis. It's an inherent part of a person's identity that's always been there. When someone attends a clinician and gains a formal diagnosis, or when someone self-identifies as autistic, it's not the beginning of them being autistic, but just a confirmation of who they've always been. It's a crucial, crucial moment in that person's life journey. At its best, with a collaborative neuroaffirmative clinical assessment process, it can be a moment of recognition and validation, an affirmation that can lead to greater self-understanding and a sense of belonging within the autistic community. So why do we need neuroaffirmative post-identification support? Well, whether it's through professional identification or through personal insight, this period marks a turning point. a time of understanding and self-exploration, and the embrace of an identity that brings new perspective to one's experiences. It can be a moment of profound personal significance as it provides a framework to better understand oneself, and it offers a community of shared experiences and understanding. Think of it this way. The person has embarked on a journey seeking confirmation for various reasons. Maybe they sought clarity about their experiences, or maybe they needed access to certain supports or disability accommodations. The motivations are as diverse as the people themselves, although there are some recurring themes that we have found in Thriving Autistic after working with over 10,000 people. It's during this post-identification period that people start to integrate this new understanding of themselves into their daily lives, and it can be really challenging to navigate this phase alone. The whole sense of self and understanding of the past experiences and the meaning that has been made of those past experiences has all been shaken. This is where post-identification support can step in. With the right support, the quality of life and the well-being of autistic people can be significantly enhanced. So let's move on to part 3 and see what good post-identification support could look like. This quote here by Dr. Nick Walker from 2020 really summarizes, I believe, all that's been said so far by me. In terms of discourse, research, and policy, the pathology paradigm asks, what do we do about the problem of these people not being normal? Whereas the neurodiversity paradigm asks, what do we do about the problem of these people being oppressed, marginalized, and or poorly served by the prevailing culture? So hopefully after reading Nick's quote, or perhaps you already know this, it's clear why we are seeing the positionality of the therapist as being vitally important. It's essential to both be a reflexive practitioner as well as an informed practitioner. Reflexive in that if you don't share the same neurotype as your client, all your assumptions about them and their motivations will be coming from your own perspective, of course. And remembering Milton's double empathy research, they will necessarily be flawed. So goals must be then co-created, and you must have epistemological humility. Be an informed practitioner about autistic experience and theory. Let go of normative expectations and goals. They won't serve you on this journey. Educate your client about autistic experience and theory if they are not already. Connect them with others who share their neurology. Be alert to internalized ableism, both in yourself and in them. They most likely will have lots to unpack from living a life trying to be something that they're not, and then likely beating themselves up for never being quite able to do it. Be careful though when co-creating goals that they're not neuronormative. Sometimes because of internalized ableism, our clients will want goals that will keep them masking, oppressed and marginalized. With gentleness and humility, help them unpack these. As therapists, healthcare professionals, or practitioners, we need to understand common experiences such as masking and autistic burnout, interoception and alexithymia, synesthesia, communication preferences and autistic body language, autistic developmental trajectories and autistic culture. Intersectionality and minority stress are vitally important. We need to deeply understand these if we're to support the person's journey to self-understanding and authentic living. So given that there's so much to remember and there's so many dimensions to this, I want to share something with you that I've been working on. It's a model that I'm working on, and I'm calling it the Integrated Intersectional Neuroaffirmative Model of Post-Identification Support. It's very long right now, but it's still a work in progress. It's a framework designed to improve post-identification support for autistic adults. And actually, I'm really excited to be sharing it with you wise people today, because I'm hoping to learn from our conversation later how useful it might be and what changes I'll need to make to maximize the usefulness. The model builds upon the principles of the social ecological model, intersectionality theory, and neurodiversity. And we're going to view it through the social and psycho elements of the biopsychosocial model of disability. You'll see there in the heart of the model, we have the person. And here, post-identification support involves supporting people to process this new understanding of themselves. I'm going to move on to my next slide, which is just adding on a little bit about what we work on in each level. It's not as, I need help with my graphic designer to fix it, but it'll give you an idea. It's just, I'm adding in these little labels there for what are the actual parts that we tend to work on when we're working in these levels with people. So in that individual level, you'll see it's often about unlearning internalized ableism and understanding theories like the double empathy problem, which, as we know, illuminates that communication struggles between autistic and non-autistic neurotypes aren't the burden of the autistic person alone. At this level of support, we also recommend working with allied professionals like occupational therapists, so a person can understand their own sensory experiences, their challenges and their joys, so they can adapt their environment. Furthermore, it's about helping people understand common autistic experiences they may be having, such as autistic burnout, masking, camouflage, alexithymia, interoception differences, synesthesia, fostering a self-understanding, a positive autistic identity, and some self-advocacy skills. Of course, there's an entire body of work around their thoughts and their emotions and their feelings about the confirmation that they are autistic. So all of this is very fluid, multidimensional work, all of these individual elements weaving together collaboratively during the course of your time with the person. Moving outward then to the interpersonal level, common areas that we work on in this area of post-identification support would be unmasking, disclosure to family, friends, or work, increasing awareness of sensory differences, helping both the person and their close ones understand the equally valid yet different ways of experiencing the world. Autistic communication is another primary area of focus, unlearning the norm that the dominant communication style is the correct one, and embracing the journey, the deeper understanding of autistic communication styles and cross-neurotype communication can bring to a family or a couple. Crucially important too, with both sensory and communication differences, is managing the ever-fluid nature of competing needs within a family or a couple. For example, you may have a parent, an autistic parent, who needs a lot of quietness around the home. You may have a child, autistic or not, who's very loud. So these needs may be competing, and it's not always a concrete answer. The parent cannot always have just headphones on to keep silent. The child can't be asked to be quiet. So there's a very fluid nature of this. Then we reach the organizational level. And here in Thriving Autistic, and it will depend on your individual roles as clinicians or as therapists, what elements of this model that you can engage in. But with the organization level, what we're doing is we're supporting individuals to self-advocate. We help them to make sure their unique needs and strengths are recognized and accommodated. That might look like providing supporting letters for necessary disability adjustments in environments like workplace, health, or educational institutions. We've been engaging on this level since we began in 2020. In Ireland, for example, for the past 3 years, lecturing on the doctoral programs for new ed and clinical psychologists, training public healthcare teams and private practitioners on this neuroaffirmative practice and support piece. Beyond the organizational layer, obviously, are then the community and public policy levels. And here, advocacy and systemic change becomes critical, ensuring that communities and societal structures are inclusive, understanding, and supportive of neurodivergent people. We've begun to engage further in this area, and it's an area we would like to develop further. Overlaying these layers, we see intersecting identities, the crucial identity of race and ethnicity, and how that impacts on an autistic person's experience in every level, from barriers to accessing a diagnosis, to perhaps it being unsafe for them to unmask rather, in certain domains. You think of the harm that happens to young Black men, and how young Black autistic men, it would not be for many of them safe to learn how to unmask and to openly and freely stim and move their body in certain environments. So there is a massive piece of work around each of these elements of our identities, our race, our ethnicity, our gender. I see I'm coming up to my time, so I'll hurry up, but there is such a huge piece of work also around gender. We know that a large majority of the autistic community that has been identified are members of the queer community also. And also there are a large number of trans autistic people. And due to ableism and everything that we have spoken of earlier, if a trans autistic person goes to look for affirming care and it's understood they're autistic, they're most likely going to be denied that care because it is assumed through the medical model viewpoint that if the person is autistic, they can't actually know what their gender experience is. So this denies them agency. It's entirely wrong. And so we can see at every level here, the different intersectional identities that we hold have to be accounted for in any framework, I believe, in this day. Across the entirety of the model then, at the background, we have this gradient representing systemic bias, discrimination, prejudice, and ableism, and it permeates all levels, and it must be continually acknowledged and challenged. So my goal with this model is to hopefully foster a holistic understanding of the autistic experience and to help guide us in developing more comprehensive, individualized, and effective support systems for autistic adults, taking all of these considerations into account. As we move forward, let's remember that the journey towards effective post-identification support is a shared responsibility. Hopefully, my hope through this model is that, and as you help and as we help to create it and evolve it, is that we can support the person to understand and embrace their neurology, enhance interpersonal relationships. We can work towards creating more inclusive organizations and foster supportive communities, advocating for equitable public policies, all while challenging systemic bias at every step. Our collective efforts can pave the way for a world where autistic people are understood and respected and supported across all aspects of life. It's been an honor to join with you today as we together work to create change, and let's continue to seize this opportunity. Thank you so much. There is my contact information if you would like to get in touch. And again, there is the link to collect the slides and other resources that I've added there too.